You Don't Know Jack is a 2010 made for TV biopic. It is directed by Barry Levinson and written by Adam Mazur.
It stars Al Pacino, Susan Sarandon, John Goodman, and Danny Huston.
The budget for this movie was right around 18 million, and there was no box office take. It was released straight to HBO.
The tomato meter rating was 83% with an identical audience score of 83%.
It is not often that the critics and the audience agree. It's interesting to see that. So for this movie, some may call it euthanasia, some call it assisted suicide, and some call him Dr. Death. Based on the true story, You Don't Know Jack follows Dr. Jack Kevorkian as he advocates for the terminally ill and disabled patients to choose their end of life. All right, so even though I'm what we call a boomer online, I am actually young enough that when Dr. Kevorkian was active, I don't remember a lot of what was really going on. This biopic taught me a lot about that. So I'm kind of hoping that they were, accurate. I'm hoping I'm not just based off Pacino's performance, but the actual facts. But as a film, I did enjoy this watch. I feel like Pacino, Goodman, and Sarandon all gave great performances. I feel like the narrative was told in a way that kept me engaged. And overall, I felt like it was high quality. However, with a biopic like this, I do feel like the most important part is the actual story, what is actually going on. And especially with this, I feel like the most important part is the debate that Kevorkian was trying to raise. If you're familiar with our concept, you probably know that I do have a bit of a bias against organized religion. With that bias aside, it's interesting to me that the arguments presented in this film have really much to do with the separation of church and state. I think that is a big issue in the world. And I think I just think that is a very, very important thing. Of course, death is a really tough subject. It's something that we're all going to have to deal with at some point, and mortality is fucking scary. I understand that. However, I think as we've talked about a lot on this, like, just because conversations are uncomfortable doesn't mean that they're not worth having. So I don't want to speak for distance here, but one thing that I've realized over doing this is exactly that. Like, uncomfortable conversations have to them. There's definitely there's weight there, and there's something to be gained. So when it comes to giving this any sort of verdict as a film, like I said, I enjoyed it simply as a film. But I do think that there is a much more important thing here, that is the conversation at hand. I think that the smaller conversation of patients' rights and assisted suicide and things like that, I think that is important. However, I think that all of this is just a part of the larger conversation of the separation of church and state. The more people that I think are engaged with ideas like this and having actual conversations about it, the better I think the world is. So I do think that I have to give this movie a yes, just simply for the fact that I think that it sparks the type of conversations that more people should have in the world. What about you?
Oh, yeah. I remember watching this a long time ago, and it's funny because I remember Dr. Kevorkian. I remember people talking about him in the 90s. I remember an uncle. He was married to my mother's sister, so he wasn't my uncle by we weren't genetically related, but he was part of my young life. He was an ordained minister, and he went to church. He sang in the choir there. He read his Bible often. And also, Uncle, if you're listening, it's pronounced Kevorkian, not Kevorky. I do remember him saying the guy's name wrong.
That's funny.
So, and he's not watching. He wouldn't watch the show. But I remember him having such a problem with the guy. And, the Dr. Death nickname was something that was used. I remember the Barbara Walters interview. Like, I actually remember one of my parents, because I think, I want to say my dad, watched 60 Minutes all the time. Like, every time it was on, he was watching it. So I remember vaguely the interview. But when I saw the movie the first time, and this was a while ago, when it, kind of first came out, I believe I was working at Blockbuster when this film came out.
Yeah, it was 2010.
I want to say that when it was, I think it was released to, was it on DVD? I can't actually remember how I saw it now. But I remember going back and looking at some of the details. And one thing I've noticed with a lot of biopic films, they did the same thing with the movie with the two Formula One drivers, Niki Lauda, and I forget the other guy's name. The other driver. But
was
the
movie just called F1? Was that the movie?
No, it was. I cannot remember the name of the movie.
Rush.
Oh yes, Rush. That was the name of the movie. They do this thing in a lot of these biopic films where they'll put things that people said in interviews in the dialogue.
Yeah.
There's several parts because there's a scene in and I know this isn't about that movie, but there's a scene in Rush where Niki Lauda is in a car with a lady, and he says to the lady, like, it's a funny line. He's like, I have a very good ass that can feel all the things that a car is doing underneath me. But he said that in an interview. He didn't say that to anybody, like, in conversation that anybody that made the film could have known about. And that's the same thing here. I noticed that after when I saw this movie the first time, I started to look at video footage of interviews with Jack Kevorkian, like, a decade ago. And a lot of the lines in the movie are stuff that he said in interviews. So, I mean, that's really not necessarily, it's a good way to create some degree of realism because it is something that they would say because they did say it.
Yeah.
I kind of like that.
Me too. It at least makes me feel like Pacino's portrayal was closer to reality then. Yeah.
Yeah. They at least, like, grounded it, a little bit, and honestly, I don't know who else could have played this role other than Al Pacino. His physical appearance, the way he does that sort of weird Midwestern thing, the accent, which is hilarious because of how Pacino actually speaks. And as a film, well put together, well filmed, cool scenes, interesting dialogue. Good character development, like you really know who the people are in the film. Then once again, the issues are things that that are there to talk about, that are still relevant now. It's not just like necessarily a church and state thing. I know that, like, the westernized American version of the Judeo-Christian worldview is a big part of a lot of the people's perspectives in the film. But, outside of the movie, this is still like an ethical conversation to be had, in philosophy classrooms and, courts of law. And I'm sure there have been several groups of law students that have gotten together and done the Socratic kind of thing with these sorts of issues. So yeah, it to me is a movie that, it is a little hard to watch. But it's something that we can all relate to. So before I give you my verdict, I will say, memento mori, remember that you will die. And also, yes, watch this movie. I really think it's a good one. Highly recommend it. It is uncomfortable. If you haven't experienced things like this, seen people go through this, and it's uncomfortable if you have, it makes you ask the questions.
I agree. I definitely, I do think it's interesting you brought up. I honestly, I want to get into it further in the episode, but I honestly do not see the argument against it other than the religious argument. So that's like, I want to, I guess, like, get into like some of the more logical stuff later, but yeah, let's go ahead and bring out Spoiler Terry.
Can I put him over there?
Oh yeah, sure. You want to hand him to me? Yeah. Oh, I gotta grab him. Yeah. Oh, yeah. There he is.
All right.
And then we'll just get rid of him. Oh, get out of here. All right. Yeah. Let's get into this.